Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we're going to talk to a very talented local author. You're at least local at the
Danville,
moment.
California.
Yeah. Her name is Jodi Compton, and her newest novel is called Hailey's War, published by Shea Earhart Books. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to have you come by. Now, this is actually your third book. The one just before this one was called 37th Hour.
The first book was called 37th Hour. The second book was called Sympathy Between Humans.
Okay.
And I'm pretty much a lifelong Californian, except for 2 years and change in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, which is why those two books are about a Minneapolis
If you just do 2 years, you can remain a native.
Okay.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
And is the 30? Are those two involved with Minneapolis in terms of place?
Right. I didn't write them until I came home. I was doing some grad school in Minneapolis, but came back and moved to San Luis Obispo to work in the newsroom there, the San Luis Obispo Tribune, then the Telegram Tribune. And while I was working on the copy desk there, they had a nice schedule down there. Then they had their copy editors worked 4 10-hour days instead of 5 8-hour days. And it gave me a lot of time to, I try to do about 3 to 5 hours every day off. I started working on a novel while I was a full-time copy editor and set them both in Minneapolis because it was, most recently where I was from, and it was just sort of where I saw the action of the book taking place.
And they're two thrillers?
They're police novels. What I write is most commonly categorized as mystery. I don't really think of them that way. I think of them more broadly as crime novels.
Okay. Yeah, I think crime novel is a good fit for this one.
Hailey's War?
Yeah.
Certainly. She's neither a cop nor a PI.
But there's a lot of criminal types running around in the book.
Quite a few organized crime figures, yeah.
In fact, Booklist, when they reviewed the book, spoke about that you have a definite gift for portraying flawed, multidimensional characters. Flawed, multidimensional characters, and I think of the criminals that are in this book and the killers and so forth. So I guess they're right. You into flawed folks, are you?
Yeah, generally people divide crime novels into hard-boiled and cozy. I'm definitely on the hard-boiled end of the spectrum.
Good. I think that's, I don't know, that's my favorite end of the spectrum. I mean, really, I like hard-boiled. The flawed part of it suggests that there are characters here that are both, good and bad, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And you can see that in a character like Serena, who's a gang leader, a lady leader of an L.A. gang.
Yeah, I should explain to people who, presumably most of your listeners have not read the book yet. So I should explain a little bit about what the book is about. Hailey Cain is a former West Point cadet. And early on in the book, she tells readers that she was discharged from the U.S. Military Academy 2 months before she would have become a second lieutenant in the Army. She's from California, so she comes back here, and she's working as a bike messenger in San Francisco. And that's when she gets a call from Serena Delgadillo, who the L.A. police know as War Child.
War Child.
Yeah, that's her. In the gang culture, they call it, you can call it street name, moniker, but everybody's got their sort of nickname that they go by. That's what her gang brothers gave her because she's one of the rare females. And this does happen in the gang culture who chose to, shave her head, dress cholo, and run with the guys as opposed to be one of the sort of girls that just hung around the edges of the gang.
Yeah.
So by the time she gets in touch with
Mostly
Hailey,
it seems sitting on the couch.
There's
a new form of couch potato.
Well, when you read about the gang culture, you find that the girls are becoming more active and they're becoming more violent in committing crimes. Serena she has her own code of honor like Hailey does. But she gets a call from Serena, who is by now leading her own girls. She wants Hailey to escort this girl who is not in the gang culture back to Mexico, where the girl needs to take care of her sick grandmother. But of course, Nydia isn't really going to take care of her sick grandmother. She's running away from something. That's how the whole story gets started.
And that introduces, I think, one of the interesting and important things about Hailey, the fact that she would do this out of a friendship that has had an interrupted period. And yet when Serena comes to her, she says, let's go, I'll do it. Rather admirable, but a little strange, I think.
There is pay that is offered, and Hailey, because she gets shot when she goes down to Mexico, never quite collects on that.
That's true.
But my editor went around about this, whether should she do this just out of loyalty, should she be offered pay, so.
Okay. Hailey's War is action-packed and moves at a breakneck pace, while at the same time taking us into a very different world of pride and revenge. And we'll share some of this when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
Hailey's War, that's the title of today's novel, and the author, Jodi Compton, has joined us, published by Shea Earhart Books. And Publishers Weekly said something that you'll have to explain to me. I mean, they just give me this little squib from Publishers Weekly. This is a Kill Bill-style revenge thriller.
Yes.
Is that based on the incident in the book where she's put into an induced coma?
Hailey, like the bride in Kill Bill, is shot and spends some time in a coma. I love Quentin Tarantino. That was not really thinking about Kill Bill when I sat down to write this book, though.
I don't imagine so. This world that you bring us into is one that you render with a kind of what I would call naturalness. It's like, here it is, and you immediately make us a part of it. I felt very comfortable in it, even though there are some very different things that go on in it. Like, for example, the jumping in ceremony.
You're talking about the gangbanger culture in East L.A.
Yes.
When Hailey can't go home to San Francisco, she goes and hides out in the barrio with Serena and her girls. And eventually Serena demands, as the price of loyalty, that Hailey, even though she's 24 by this point and much too old really to join a gang, does go through the initiation ceremony, sort of to prove her loyalty. That's the reason why I think that the gangbangers are characters in the book that are never really judged. I never make moral judgments about the world that they live in. I just wanted them to have... I didn't want there to be a social worker or an understanding teacher in the book who saves one of these girls or redeems them, or Hailey to take on that role for any of them, because none of us in our lives think of ourselves as passive objects that need to be acted on and redeemed. We think of ourselves as architects of our own lives, and so do Serena and her girls.
Right. That's a good point. That's good. Now, Hailey gets deep into this world when she decides to escort this. We find out to be pregnant teenager, I guess she is, into the mountains of Mexico from San Francisco, and one of the great moments in the book, which you do a fantastic job on, is what I wrote down here. I called the big tunnel shootout.
Yes.
What happened to the poor dear?
What happens in the book to Hailey?
Well, yeah, don't give it away. I mean, she's driving she's in Mexico when
she
this
is,
happens.
and I can tell you about this because early on I wrote the jacket copy for this book myself.
Did you?
And my agent was editing it. He's like, "Don't give too much away. Don't give too much away." So the initial jacket copy that I had says almost nothing about the book. And then a bunch of reviews came out that gave away everything almost up to the last 5 pages. So it's cutting the cat's out of the bag. Hailey she's taking Nydia home to the Sierra Madre, and they're almost there. And they drive into this very narrow, dim tunnel in the mountains. And there's a car parked sort of diagonally up ahead of him, and Hailey slams on the brakes, and a car pulls up behind them very neatly. Obviously doesn't have to slam on his brakes. And Hailey realizes, ambush, and she goes for her gun, which she's not supposed to be traveling with because there are very high penalties in Mexico for bringing a gun over the border. But she goes for her gun, and she's considering and she rejects trying to shoot their way out of it. But yeah, it does not end well for Hailey and Nydia, though neither of them die.
That's where she goes into the induced coma.
Yes.
Yeah. And then it's the beginning of the thugs' fascination with her. They just don't ever let her out of their sight. She's always doing something to annoy these bastards.
Well, they do let her out of their sight, and when initially they think they've killed her in Mexico. And she wakes up in the hospital after 2 months, and she comes home to San Francisco for a while before she realizes she can't be there and goes back to L.A. where Serena is. But yeah, there's one of my favorite scenes in the book is when the lead gunman in the book is a character you almost kind of like. He's kind of civilized. Hailey thinks of him as babyface.
Yeah.
And she runs into him completely by accident. She's crossing town. She's getting on the Judah bus, the Muni bus. Walks into his path, and they have this very civilized, polite conversation.
Yes.
At the end of which he breaks her finger and gets off the bus.
Yes. Waves goodbye, I suppose. I don't know.
But he tells...
Those are the kind of things that happen on the Muni.
Okay. I've spent very little time on the Muni.
Anything can happen on the San Francisco Muni. Trust me. Now, another place that you take us, where a lot of us who live in San Francisco love to go to, is Mendocino County.
Ah.
Yes, and this mobster's house, secluded, high on a hill, and relative to the thugs, the amateurs from the L.A., Hispanic gangland, get Nydia back. They steal her back from the baddies. Mm-hmm. That's a great scene.
Wallala, is in the book because some very old friends of my family live up there, and I'd been there for the first time only a couple of years earlier. So when I was just thinking about where should Skouras take Nydia during the length of her confinement because she's pregnant, I thought, well, okay, Wallala. And it's got a long, fairly remote, it's not remote, but there's a stretch of, sea ranch. It was a good place for a car chase, which then, ensues.
Oh, it's in some ways, it makes one continually worry about Hailey because she's, always one step ahead of getting shot or getting killed.
Mm-hmm.
But I like her. Like her. And I think the thing I like about her the most is probably some of the things that got ingrained in her in West Point. And that is that, the notion of loyalty and integrity.
Mm-hmm.
That's very powerful throughout the novel. Hailey's War, though, has at least 2 surprise endings. And we're not going to give either one of them away. When we come back, we're going to get a little closer to Hailey Cain.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast, Hailey's War, a novel by Jodi Compton is what we're talking about today. It's published by Shea Earhart Books. And what I want to do in this last segment is talk some more about Hailey Cain, because I liked her right away. I liked her when she, as a bike messenger, spends time on the Golden Gate Bridge trying to talk people out of jumping. I like that.
Yeah, Hailey considers that her hobby.
Yeah. I like the virtues, if you will, that emerged apparently from her being ex-West Point, and also her strength, her loyalty. Where did you dig her up from? Is she a composite of folks you knew?
No, the first character in the book to come into very clear focus to me was her cousin, CJ, who is the very successful music producer, but they both grew up...
And bailer outer.
Yes, they both... A lot of the book is about... to me, no character in this book is older than 24 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I consider this to be, in one sense, it's a classic loner defies a powerful mobster story.
Right.
But in another sense, I consider this to be a book about California and her children. The three major characters in the book, Hailey, Serena, and CJ maybe a little less important, all come from elsewhere, from Mexico, from Texas, from Appalachia, and become very Californian. So CJ, I kind of got the idea of him first, and she developed almost in response to him, and I just knew I wanted to do this character who was extremely reckless, almost fearless, and she shifted through a couple of incarnations before I came into full focus as the former West Point cadet.
Mm. It's interesting that you began it all with CJ, who's a fascinating character, and at the beginning, seems like he's not going to amount to much. Mm-hmm. And he does amount to much.
He does something that people almost don't do anymore with any degree of success, which is he drops out of high school in his senior year, which during World War II or something, kids did that to either go to war or, to work, to support their families or so forth, and you could step from that into a productive place in society. When CJ does it, his parents, everybody just thinks he's ruined. He wants to go to L.A. and work, be in music. And, he starts dealing pot because he can't support himself any other way, and everybody thinks his life is going to go downhill. 4 years later, by the time Hailey comes home from West Point, she's supposed to be her family's success story. When she comes home from West Point, sort of failed on a Greyhound bus, CJ is by that point a Grammy-winning music producer.
Yeah. And he doesn't forget his friends.
Yes, he's sort of her chief support.
Particularly, he doesn't forget Hailey. Which is very nice. We've talked some about Serena, who is really very strong, and she does. I don't think she kills anybody in this book, but she talks a lot about killing people.
Yes, and she refuses in one scene to tell Hailey whether she killed anyone back in her Cholo days.
Right, yeah.
She's trying to get a secret out of Hailey, and Hailey says, "I'll tell you if you'll tell me." When kids or teenagers are banging hardest, they walk up, to porches or to cars and blast away. And did you ever do that? And Serena says, "If you tell me that, will you? I tell you that. Will you tell me this?" And they both decide stalemate.
There's a very funny line in here, or kind of incident where Hailey needs to get a car, and she gets the money from CJ, and Serena's quite upset. She said, "We have cars all over the place."
Yes,
and Hailey has to explain
that she can't drive around California on a mission in a stolen car, where any meter maid that reads the plates will drag it off to an impound.
Oh. Now, Serena's equal in this gang on the male side is a fellow by the name of, is it Payaso? Do I have that? Payaso. And it's interesting. I think the women are much stronger in this book than the men. But Payaso does help.
Yes.
He's not a dummy.
And
he does control a lot of guys.
He didn't, I don't talk as much about the guys as maybe I meant to going in, because my idea with this book was partly that how interesting it would be if you got these gangbangers from the streets and they got together to rescue Nydia and went to war against a traditional Sopranos-style gangster and his hired men. Mm-hmm. And that never really shaped up to the classic throwdown that I thought it was going to be, partly because it was a relatively simple operation for them to get Nydia out of the house in Walla. I simply did not have enough work for 7 gangbangers to do, so they got sort of laid off in a writerly sense.
Oh, the poor guys.
I know.
I hope they're not collecting unemployment insurance.
But one of my favorite scenes to write was the interview where Hailey goes with Serena after she gets jumped in. Serena makes that the price of getting Trace's support in going to war against Skouras and rescuing Nydia. She says, take your beating, get jumped in, which she does. And the next day, with Hailey still bruised and everything, she goes almost to a job interview where she sits in Payasso's living room and explains to him why she's going to take on this mission and what she needs from him. And you can see there that he is a figure of power in his world.
Yes, he is, particularly in that scene. Yeah, that's such good stuff. Now, one of the fellows that is on the periphery but has a very important role, I think, in the plot, and is wonderfully drawn, if briefly so, a wealthy man by the name of Trey Marcellus.
Luke Marcellus. Trey was his son.
Ah.
So, yeah, he is.
And his son is...
Do you want me to give that away?
That
comes up. That's about chapter 6 in the book, where you learn why Luke Marcellus is important. So it's not a huge giveaway, but I'm not going to say it on the air. Generally, though, Luke Marcellus was a former South Central OG drug dealer who, jumped into the rap business.
Okay. Now, are we to tell people that there will be more of Hailey Cain?
Yes, there will.
How soon?
Probably June 2011. Thieves Get Rich, Saints Get Shot is the name of the second book.
And it's coming out when?
Publishing schedules vary.
Yeah.
Probably June 2011.
Okay. Well, all of you out there, get started now on Hailey by getting your copy of Hailey's War by Jodi Compton. She's been good enough to stop by. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.